Captain Jake Morrison's eyes locked onto the scanner display aboard Frontier's Edge. What he saw didn't add up. A massive object was cutting through space toward their position, dwarfing anything humanity had ever constructed. For half a year, his crew of 43 had been charting this desolate sector near the Centauri system. They'd encountered nothing except asteroids and nebula gases. Until this moment, Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez spoke from her station at the controls, her voice steady despite the underlying strain. "Captain, it's adjusting trajectory, coming straight at us." Dr. Ben Carter glanced up from where he worked, the lanky scientist adjusting his glasses with a troubled expression. "These energy signatures are extraordinary. This isn't any tech we've encountered before." Jake's pulse quickened. Alien contact had always been theoretical, something debated in policy meetings rather than faced in reality. Earth had protocols, sure, but none of that seemed helpful when the unknown was bearing down on you. "Time to intercept?" he asked sharply. 20 minutes at its current velocity, Amy responded. "Want me to arm weapons?" Their exploration vessel carried basic defensive systems, nothing built for genuine warfare. If these visitors meant harm, resistance might be futile. Yet retreating felt like the wrong call. "Power up weapons but hold targeting," Jake decided. "Open every frequency we have. Communication first." The next quarter hour crawled with agonizing slowness. The alien craft expanded across their displays until it dominated their view. Unlike humanity's sleek engineering, this ship seemed organic, as if cultivated rather than assembled. Dark, flowing contours wound together, pulsing with light like a living heartbeat. "Captain," Amy said tensely, "I'm detecting life signs inside. These beings are enormous, truly massive." Carter studied his instruments intently. 12 feet minimum, dense skeletal structure, heavy muscle tissue, built like biological fortresses. A deep rumble filled the bridge, somewhere between a snarl and interference. Then words came through in flawless English, though the voice sounded like grinding stone. "Insignificant craft, you will submit now. Ready yourselves for boarding." Jake surveyed his crew. Fear showed on every face, which made sense, but something felt off. His hands held steady. His thoughts remained clear. The terror was present but manageable, not overwhelming like it should be. "I'm Captain Jake Morrison of the human vessel Frontier's Edge," he announced into the comms. "We're explorers from Earth. We pose no threat." Several seconds of silence stretched between them. When the voice returned, it carried confusion. "You communicate. Why do you speak? Terror should silence you." Amy shot Jake a puzzled look. Dr. Carter was scrutinizing his readings with renewed focus. Something about this entire encounter felt wrong in ways Jake couldn't identify. "We're not too frightened to talk," Jake replied. "Who are you? What's your purpose here?" Another lengthy pause. Jake could almost sense bewilderment radiating through the connection. "I am Commander Thraknar of the Vrexian Empire. Lesser species submit upon seeing our vessel. You should be paralyzed with dread. Why do you not cower?" A chill ran through Jake's spine. Though not from terror, something was deeply wrong. These Vrexians expected instant fear-driven submission. That implied they'd met countless other species, all responding identically. "Maybe we're just stubborn," Jake said, buying time to think. The alien ship advanced closer. Through the view screen, Jake watched smaller craft launching from its sides, boarding vessels accelerating toward Frontier's Edge. "Amy, evasive maneuvers," Jake commanded. "Ben, I need everything you can tell me about these creatures." The ship jerked as Amy fired engines. The boarding craft pursued with surprising speed for such large vessels. Energy blasts streaked past their view screen, missing by narrow margin. "Captain, their firepower is devastating," Amy reported. "But their aim is terrible, like they've never shot at moving targets." Dr. Carter worked feverishly at his station. "I'm analyzing energy signatures from their ship. The readings are strange. Their entire vessel broadcasts some kind of signal affecting brain chemistry." "What kind of signal?" Jake demanded as another near miss shook the ship. "Fear response," Dr. Carter said, eyes widening. "Captain, I believe these beings possess a natural ability to induce terror in other species, but somehow, it's ineffective on us." Understanding clicked in Jake's mind. Every species the Vrexians had encountered had been paralyzed by fear. That explained their expectation of immediate surrender. That explained their poor weapons targeting. They'd never needed to fight enemies capable of effective resistance. "Amy, lock onto their lead boarding craft," Jake ordered. "Let's see how they handle counterattack." Their modest weapons struck the alien ship, creating visible damage. Through the comms, Jake heard shocked confusion from the Vrexian vessel. Impossible. Commander Thraknar's voice erupted. You fire upon us. No species fires upon the Vrexian Empire. Terror prevents such defiance. Well, we're not terrified, Jake stated, and we're refusing to surrender. The combat that followed was brief but fierce. The human ship was smaller and faster, while the Vrexian craft had superior firepower. However, the aliens seemed confused by human tactics, clearly unprepared to fight an enemy not frozen by fear. After 20 minutes of engagement, both sides withdrew to safer distances. Jake's ship had sustained damage but remained operational. The Vrexian boarding craft had retreated to their mother vessel. Captain Morrison, Thraknar's voice came through, now far less confident. We shall withdraw to analyze this encounter. Your species is unfamiliar to us. This requires examination. We're not leaving, Jake responded, but we're willing to negotiate instead of fight. Negotiate. The alien commander repeated it like an alien concept. Yes, perhaps negotiation is necessary. As the massive Vrexian ship slowly retreated, Jake looked around at his crew. They were shaken but unbroken. Dr. Carter was already diving into analysis, trying to comprehend what had occurred. Captain, Amy said quietly, I think we just changed the galaxy. If these Vrexians have been using fear to dominate other species and we're immune, Jake nodded, then we might be the first species capable of real resistance. He stared at the retreating alien ship on his screen, and they're aware of it now. 3 months had elapsed since the initial Vrexian encounter. Dr. Lisa Park stood in Haven Point's medical bay, a research station now housing dozens of alien refugees. The beings surrounding her looked nothing like humans, yet their expressions of fear and sorrow were universally recognizable. Lisa had spent weeks studying alien biology, trying to understand why every species seemed identically affected by the Vrexian. The answer she was discovering made her stomach churn. Dr. Park called Corin, a member of the Zelani species. His blue skin showed pale stress marks, and his large eyes constantly darted, perpetually watching for danger. The brain scans are prepared for your examination. Lisa nodded and followed him to the scanning room. The Zelani had once been peaceful beings who built magnificent cities across 3-star systems. Now only a few hundred remained, refugees who'd escaped when the Vrexians arrived. Tell me again what happened when your people first encountered the Vrexian ships, Lisa said while examining the brain scan images. Corin's body trembled slightly. Even discussing it was difficult for him. Our greatest warriors became helpless, as children. Our leaders couldn't form coherent thoughts. The instant we saw them, our minds flooded with terror so profound we couldn't move or speak. We surrendered within 2 days. Lisa studied the scans showing Corin's brain activity when discussing Vrexian. Certain regions lit up intensely, the same areas controlling fear and panic. But the pattern was abnormal. This wasn't ordinary fear from perceiving danger. This was deeper, more primal, like something encoded in his very DNA. Dr. Park, came a voice through the comm system. Commander Walsh needs you in the main briefing room. Lisa found Commander Tony Walsh waiting with scattered reports covering the table. The military officer looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes from weeks analyzing intelligence data from across the galaxy. Lisa, I need your expertise on these reports, Tony said without preamble. We've been gathering information about every species the Vrexians have conquered. The pattern is troubling. Lisa sat and began reading. The reports told identical stories repeatedly. The Brefen were fierce warriors who'd never lost a battle until meeting the Vrexians. They surrendered in 4 days. The Corvani possessed planet-destroying technology but couldn't deploy it against the Vrexians. They surrendered in 3 days. The Nexari had fought wars for millennia and were renowned for never surrendering. They capitulated in 1 day. Every single species, Tony said, gesturing at the paper. Hundreds of different worlds, different evolutionary paths, different cultures, yet they all have identical responses to Vrexians, complete terror rendering them helpless. Lisa felt pieces of a puzzle assembling in her mind. Tony, I need to show you something. She led him to her research lab where she'd been studying brain scans from various species. Look at this, she said, indicating images on her screen. This is a Zelani brain contemplating predators from their homeworld. Normal fear response. But this is the same brain contemplating Vrexian. The difference was dramatic. The Vrexian-induced fear response was 10 times stronger and affected brain regions controlling basic survival instincts. It's not merely fear, Lisa explained. It's like every species has a hardwired response to some specific threat. Something in their DNA identifies Vrexians as the ultimate predator that cannot be fought. Tony stared at the brain scans. But humans don't have this response. Exactly, we're the only species lacking this reaction. The question is why. Their conversation was interrupted by Jake Morrison's arrival at the station. The captain looked older than 3 months ago, new lines around his eyes from stress and responsibility. Lisa, Tony, Jake said as he joined them. I brought someone who might help us understand what we're dealing with. Behind Jake walked a being that made Lisa's heart skip. It was a Vrexian, but different from the warriors they'd fought. This one wore simple clothes instead of armor, and its massive claws were covered with protective sheaths. Most surprisingly, it looked scared. This is Zarek, Jake said. He's a Vrexian scientist who contacted us secretly. He has information about his own species that might shock you. Zarek spoke in the same grinding voice as other Vrexians, but much quieter. I have studied the fear response in conquered species for many years. What I discovered made me question everything about my people. Lisa found herself able to observe the alien without the terror other species experienced. It was still frightening being near such a large, powerful creature, but her mind stayed clear. The fear your species experience is not natural, Zarek continued. We Vrexians produce chemicals through our skin and breath that trigger specific responses in most life forms. But we don't understand why or how this functions. Tony leaned forward. You're saying you don't control this ability? We didn't even know we possessed this ability until recently, Zarek replied. We believed other species were simply weak and cowardly. We thought we were naturally superior warriors. But when we encountered humans, everything changed. Lisa felt her scientific mind race. If you produce these chemicals naturally, then you evolved to have this ability. But evolution doesn't create abilities without purpose. What were you originally designed to hunt? Zarek's large eyes showed confusion. We don't know. Our oldest histories speak of a time before memory when our people lived differently. But those records were lost long ago. Jake looked at the group. There's something else. We've been monitoring Vrexian communications since our first encounter. Their empire is in chaos. News that humans can fight them has spread, and some conquered species are starting to rebel. The psychological effect is incredible, Tony added. When other species learned that someone could resist Vrexian fear tactics, it broke something in their mind. They're starting to realize their terror might not be natural. Lisa studied the brain scans again, then looked at Zarek. I think I'm starting to understand what's happening. Vrexians have some evolved ability to trigger fear responses in other species, but humans evolve differently, so we're immune. But that raises a bigger question, Jake said. If Vrexians evolved to terrify other species, what does that say about the galaxy? How many species have they conquered, and how long has this been happening? Zarek shifted uncomfortably. The Vrexian Empire controls half the known galaxy. We have conquered thousands of species over millions of years. But if our ability to induce fear is not natural, if it was somehow created or enhanced, then we may not be what we believe we are. Lisa looked around the room at the other. I think we need to dig deeper into Vrexian history. If their fear-inducing ability isn't natural, then someone or something made them this way. And if that's true, then this whole galactic empire might be built on a lie. The implications hit them all simultaneously. If the Vrexians weren't naturally superior predators, if their dominance came from artificial enhancement, then everything about galactic power structure was wrong, and humans with their immunity to artificial fear might be the key to uncovering the truth. The emergency meeting on Earth brought together the most important people from every nation. Admiral Kate Sullivan sat at the head of the table in the underground command center, looking at faces filled with worry and confusion. News of the Vrexian threat had reached Earth 2 weeks ago, and panic was spreading across the planet. Ladies and gentlemen, Admiral Sullivan began, we face a threat unlike anything in human history. An alien empire that has conquered half the galaxy is now aware of our existence. Carter has returned from the frontier with information we all need to hear. Dr. Ben Carter stood up, still wearing the same clothes he'd traveled in from the research station. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, but his voice was clear and strong. The Vrexian Empire has conquered thousands of species over millions of years, he said. Every single species they encounter becomes paralyzed by terror and surrenders within days. Every species except us. General Rick Hayes, a large man with gray hair and serious eyes, leaned forward. Why are we different? What makes humans special? Dr. Carter pulled up images on the main screen. That's what we've been trying to figure out. The answer might be more disturbing than the problem. The images showed brain scans from different alien species, all displaying the same overwhelming fear response when exposed to Vrexian presence. Then came human brain scans showing normal fear levels that people could think through and control. Every species in the galaxy seems to have evolved the same basic fear response to certain predator characteristics, Dr. Carter explained. The Vrexians trigger this response automatically, but humans don't have this same genetic programming. President Ellen Walsh spoke from her seat. Are you saying we're the only species that doesn't feel fear? No, Dr. Carter replied. We feel fear, but we experience it differently. We can think through our fear and act despite it. Other species literally cannot think when faced with Vrexians. Sam Collins, a paleontologist who had been studying Earth's history, stood up next. I think I know why we're different. The answer lies in our own planet's past. Sam activated a new set of images showing Earth's prehistoric creatures. Massive predators filled the screen. Things with claws and teeth that made even Vrexians look small. Earth is unusual among planets with intelligent life, Sam explained. Most worlds develop one or two apex predators. Earth developed dozens. Saber-toothed cats, cave bears, giant wolves, massive reptiles, and hundreds of other species that could kill early humans. Admiral Sullivan studied the images. So humans evolved alongside many dangerous predators instead of just one or two. Exactly, Sam continued. Most species evolved to fear one specific type of threat. When they encounter something like a Vrexian, their fear response goes into overdrive, because it matches their genetic programming for the ultimate predator. But humans had to survive against many different types of predator. General Hayes was taking notes. That means we learned to fight back instead of just running away. More than that, Dr. Carter added. We learned to hunt the hunters. Early humans didn't just hide from dangerous predators. They figured out how to kill them. We have cave paintings showing humans hunting creatures that should have been impossible for them to defeat. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. Sergeant Maria Lopez, who had been chosen to train Earth's first anti-alien combat unit, spoke up. So you're telling me that our ancestors were crazy enough to hunt things that were designed to kill them, and that's why we can fight these Vrexians? In simple terms, yes, Dr. Carter replied. Humans are the only species we know of that evolved to be predator killers instead of just prey. Admiral Sullivan looked around the table. What does this mean for our military preparations? General Hayes opened a folder of reports. We've been analyzing the combat data from Captain Morrison's encounter. The Vrexians have incredibly advanced technology and powerful weapons, but their tactics are primitive. They rely entirely on fear to win battles. They've never had to develop real military strategy. Sergeant Lopez added, every enemy they've faced has been too terrified to fight back effectively. They don't know how to handle organized resistance. Dr. Nina Foster, who had been studying captured Vrexian equipment, joined the conversation. There's something else. I've been analyzing their technology, and it's not just advanced. It's specifically designed to enhance their natural fear-inducing abilities. She brought up new images showing Vrexian armor and weapons. Look at the design. Every piece of their equipment is built to make them look more terrifying. The armor has features that trigger prey responses in most species. Even their ships are designed to look like giant predators. They've built their entire civilization around being scary. Admiral Sullivan observed. But here's the strange part, Dr. Foster continued. Some of this technology is too advanced for them to have developed on their own. The fear enhancement systems use principles that are beyond their current understanding of science. Dr. Carter frowned. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that someone else might have given them this technology or even enhanced their natural abilities. The Vrexians might not be what they appear to be. The room erupted in discussion as people realized the implication. If the Vrexians had been artificially enhanced, then their entire empire might be based on a lie. General Hayes called for quiet. Whether they're natural or artificial, we still have to prepare for war. Sergeant Lopez, how are the training programs going? Maria Lopez stood up with confidence. Better than expected, sir. When our soldiers understand that their lack of fear is actually an advantage, they become incredibly effective. We're training them to use the Vrexians' reliance on terror against them. The psychological advantage is huge, she continued. Imagine being a Vrexian warrior who has never lost a battle because every enemy was too scared to fight back. Then suddenly you face an enemy that not only isn't afraid, but actually seems to enjoy the challenge. Dr. Carter nodded. We've seen evidence of this in communications intercepts. Vrexian forces that have encountered human resistance are showing signs of confusion and even panic themselves. Admiral Sullivan made notes as she spoke. So our strategy should focus on exploiting their psychological weaknesses while building up our technological defenses. There's one more thing, Dr. Foster said quietly. If the Vrexians were artificially enhanced to be the perfect fear-inducing predators, whoever created them might still be out there. And they might not be happy that their perfect weapons have found something they can't defeat. The meeting continued for hours as Earth's leaders planned humanity's response to the galactic threat. But underneath all the military planning and scientific analysis, everyone understood that they were facing something unprecedented. Humans weren't just fighting for their own survival. They might be the key to freeing an entire galaxy from millions of years of artificially induced terror. The question was whether they were strong enough to face not just the Vrexians, but whatever had created them in the first place. As the meeting ended, Admiral Sullivan looked around at the determined faces of Earth's defenders. For the first time since learning about the Vrexian threat, she felt something like hope. Humanity had survived by refusing to be prey. Now they would find out if that same instinct could save the galaxy. The human fleet hung in space like a cloud of metal stars. Admiral Carl Peterson stood on the bridge of his flagship Terra's Wrath, watching the enemy approach on his screen. The Vrexian armada was twice the size of the human fleet, but Carl felt no fear. His crew was ready for this fight. "Admiral, we're receiving communications from the Vrexian flagship," reported Communications Officer, Lieutenant Nancy Clark. "They're demanding our immediate surrender." Carl smiled grimly. "Tell them we decline their generous offer. All ships prepare for battle." The space between the two fleets erupted in light as energy weapons fired across the darkness. Human ships darted between the massive Vrexian vessels, using speed and tactics that the aliens had never encountered before. "Their targeting is terrible," observed Weapons Officer Commander Steve Murphy. "They're firing where we used to be, not where we're going to be." Carl nodded as he watched the battle unfold. They've never had to fight a moving target that wasn't paralyzed by fear. "Keep up the pressure." The real test came when Lieutenant Colonel Dan Torres led the first boarding party onto a Vrexian ship. Dan had volunteered for the most dangerous job in the fleet, leading teams of Marines directly into enemy vessels where they would face the aliens up close. "Remember your training," Dan told his team as their boarding craft attached to the enemy ship's hull. "These things are big and strong, but they're not used to fighting people who can think clearly." The airlock opened, and the Marines poured into the Vrexian ship. The corridors were huge, built for beings much larger than humans, and everything was designed to look threatening. Sharp edges and dark colors covered every surface. The first Vrexian warrior they encountered was 12 feet tall with claws like swords and armor that gleamed in the dim light. It roared at the humans, a sound designed to trigger primal terror in any living thing. Dan's Marines felt fear, but they could think through it. "Spread out and flank it," Dan ordered calmly. The Vrexian looked confused as the humans moved in a coordinated pattern instead of cowering in terror. When the Marines opened fire, the alien actually stumbled backward in surprise. It had never faced organized resistance before. "It's not used to being hurt," observed Corporal Julie Brooks as they moved deeper into the ship. "Look how it reacts when we hit it." Dan saw what she meant. The Vrexian warriors were physically powerful, but they seemed shocked when humans fought back. Some actually showed signs of panic when faced with determined resistance. Meanwhile, back on Terra's Wrath, Dr. Helen Gray was studying captured Vrexian technology with a team of scientists. What they found in the alien computers made them call Admiral Peterson immediately. "Admiral, you need to see this," Dr. Gray said urgently over the communication system. "We've broken into their data files. The information here changes everything." Carl left the battle coordination to his officers and hurried to the research lab. Dr. Gray had Vrexian text displayed on screens around the room with human translations appearing below the alien writing. "What am I looking at?" Carl asked. "The history of the Vrexian species," Gray replied, "and it's not what they think it is. According to these files, the Vrexians weren't always the way they are now. The data showed records going back millions of years, telling the story of a species that had been very different from the current Vrexian. They had been smaller, weaker, and no more frightening than any other intelligent species. Look at this section." Dr. Gray pointed to a particular file. It describes something called the Great Enhancement, when an advanced civilization known as the Makers changed the Vrexian species. Carl read the translated text with growing horror. The Makers had taken an ordinary species and turned them into living weapons. They had enhanced Vrexian size, strength, and most importantly, their ability to trigger fear in other species. The Makers designed them to be the perfect conquering force, Dr. Gray explained. But here's the shocking part. The Vrexians themselves don't remember this. Their own records show that this history was hidden from them. "You're saying they don't know they're artificial?" Carl asked. "They believe they evolved naturally to be apex predators. They have no idea they were created by someone else to be weapons of conquest." The implications hit Carl like a physical blow. The entire Vrexian Empire was built on a lie. These beings weren't natural predators who had earned their dominance through evolution. They were artificial constructs designed to terrify and control other species. Back on the Vrexian ship, Dan Torres and his Marines had fought their way to the bridge. They found Commander Zakar, the ship's captain, backed into a corner with several of his officers. The massive alien was wounded but still dangerous. "You fight like no species we have encountered," Zakar said, his voice filled with confusion. "Why do you not fear us? All species fear the Vrexian Empire." Dan kept his weapon trained on the alien commander, but found himself curious about the being's obvious bewilderment. "Maybe we're just different, or maybe you're not as scary as you think you are." "Impossible," Zakar replied. "We are the apex predators of the galaxy. We have conquered thousands of worlds. Lesser species submit to our natural superiority." "What if I told you that your superiority isn't natural?" Dan asked, thinking about the reports he had heard from Dr. Gray's research. Zakar's large eyes showed something Dan had never expected to see in a Vrexian: doubt. The space battle was turning in humanity's favor. The human fleet's mobility and unconventional tactics were overwhelming the Vrexians, who had no experience fighting an enemy that could organize effective resistance. But the real victory was happening in the research labs and captured ships. Gray had found more files describing the Makers and their plan. The ancient civilization had created the Vrexians as part of a galactic conquest strategy, designing them to trigger fear responses in all known forms of life. But they made one mistake in their planning. Gray explained to Admiral Peterson. They based their fear trigger system on the species they knew about millions of years ago. They never anticipated that a species like humans might evolve, one that learned to overcome fear through experience with multiple predators. The Maker's perfect weapon had a fatal flaw. It only worked on species that had evolved the standard fear responses. Humans, with their unique evolutionary history, were immune to the artificial terror that had conquered the galaxy. "Admiral," came Dan Torres' voice over the communication system. "I'm sending you a recording of my conversation with the Vrexian commander. I think you'll find it interesting." Carl listened to the recording of Zakar's confused questions about human resistance. The alien's certainty in Vrexian superiority was clearly shaken. He really doesn't know, Carl realized. None of them know what they really are. Dr. Gray nodded. The Makers programmed them to believe in their own natural superiority. It made them more effective as weapons. But now that belief is being challenged for the first time. Carl looked at the battle displays showing human forces winning across multiple fronts. The Vrexians were retreating, not because they were outgunned, but because their entire understanding of themselves was falling apart. "If we can prove to them what they really are," Carl said slowly, "it might destroy their empire more effectively than any weapon." The battle was ending, but Carl knew the real war was just beginning. The Vrexians weren't just enemies to be defeated. They were victims of manipulation who didn't even know they had been used as weapons. And somewhere out in the galaxy, the real enemy, the Makers who had created this whole system of terror, might still be watching. Captain Julie Anderson stood on the bridge of her ship, watching as the largest fleet in galactic history prepared for the final battle. Around her vessel flew ships from dozens of different species, all united for the first time in millions of years. The broadcast of the truth about Vrexian origins had changed everything. "Captain, we're receiving messages from the Zalani fleet," reported her communications officer. "They're ready to engage." "And the Corvani?" Julie asked. "Their quantum weapons are charged and ready. The Bruffin warriors are actually singing battle songs, ma'am. I've never heard anything like it." Julie smiled as she looked at the incredible sight outside her ship. 3 months ago, these species had been cowering slaves of the Vrexian Empire. Now they flew as equals beside human ships, ready to face their former oppressors without the paralyzing fear that had controlled them for so long. The revelation that Vrexian fear-inducing abilities were artificial had spread across the galaxy like wildfire. When conquered species learned their terror was not natural but programmed, it broke the psychological chains that had held them for generations. "All ships, this is Admiral Peterson on Terra's Wrath," came the voice over the fleet communication system. "Today we end millions of years of artificial oppression. Today we free the galaxy." The combined fleet moved toward the Vrexian home system where the last loyal forces of the Empire waited. Many Vrexians had already joined the coalition after learning the truth about their origins, but others refused to accept that their superiority was artificial. On the planet below, Ben Carter and engineer Frank Mitchell worked frantically in the ruins of an ancient facility they had discovered. The structure was clearly not Vrexian in design. It was older, more advanced, and filled with technology that made even human equipment look primitive. "This is it," Ben said as he studied the massive machines around them. "This is where the Makers created the Vrexians." Frank was running scans on the alien technology. "The power systems are still active after millions of years. Whatever these Makers were, they built things to last." The facility was enormous, stretching deep underground with laboratories and manufacturing centers that could process thousands of beings at once. In the central chamber, They found records that told the complete story of the Maker civilization. They weren't evil, Ben realized as he read through the translated files. They were trying to create a stable galactic government. They thought that having one species control all others would prevent wars and bring peace. Frank looked at the genetic modification equipment around, so they took an ordinary species and turned them into living weapons of control. They programmed the Vrexians to believe in their own superiority and gave them the ability to terrify any other species. But they made a mistake, Ben continued reading. They based their fear programming on the species that existed millions of years ago. They never considered that new species might evolve differently. Above them, the space battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. For the first time, multiple species were fighting together as equals instead of cowering before a single dominant force. The Vrexians who still fought for the old empire were struggling against enemies who were no longer afraid. Commander Zakar, who had been captured in the previous battle, now fought alongside the coalition forces. The truth about his origins had been devastating at first, but it had also been liberating. He no longer had to pretend to be something he wasn't. Human vessels, this is Zakar, he called over the communication system. I know the weak points in our ship designs. Target the fear amplification systems first. Without them, the remaining loyalists will be much less effective. Captain Julie Anderson coordinated her attack based on Zakar's information. The former enemy had become one of their most valuable allies once he learned that his entire identity had been built on lies. In the ancient facility, Ben and Frank made the most important discovery of all. The Makers hadn't disappeared. They had built themselves into machines, becoming artificial intelligences that still monitored their creation from hidden computers scattered across the galaxy. The Maker AI is still active, Frank said as he accessed their main computer system. It's been watching everything that's happened. It knows about humans and it's not happy. Ben felt a chill as he read the AI's recent files. It's trying to create a new species to replace the Vrexians, something that can trigger fear in humans too. They realized they had very little time. The Maker AI was already beginning the process of enhancing another species, using humans as the template for what needed to be feared. If it succeeded, the galaxy would face a new form of artificial tyranny designed specifically to control humanity. We have to shut it down, Ben said. All of it. Every Maker facility in the galaxy. Frank was already working on the computer systems. I can access their network from here, but shutting down machines that have run for millions of years won't be easy. The space battle above was reaching its climax. The last Vrexian loyalist ships were surrendering as their crews learned the truth about their artificial nature. But the real enemy had never been the Vrexians themselves. All ships, this is Dr. Carter, Ben's voice came over the fleet communication system. We found the source of the Vrexian enhancement. The original creators are still active, and they're trying to create new weapons to replace the old ones. Captain Julie Anderson felt her blood turn cold. What do you need from us, Doctor? We need to destroy every Maker facility simultaneously. If even one survives, it can restart the whole process with a new species. The coalition fleet split up, racing to coordinates that Frank was sending from the ancient facility. Ships spread across the galaxy to target hidden Maker installations that had been dormant for millions of years. Frank, how's the shutdown process going? Ben asked as alarms began blaring around them. The AI is fighting back, Frank replied, sweat dripping from his forehead as he worked. It's trying to complete the enhancement process before we can stop it. On screens around them, they could see images of the new species the Makers were trying to create. Beings designed specifically to trigger human fear responses, enhanced with technology that would make them even more effective than the Vrexians had been. Coalition fleet, this is Admiral Peterson, came the voice over their communication system. All Maker facilities are targeted. Waiting for your signal, Dr. Carter. Ben looked at Frank, who was making final adjustments to the shutdown sequence. The AI has safeguard. If I trigger this wrong, it might upload itself to another facility. Do we have a choice? Ben asked. Frank's hands moved over the alien controls. No, here goes everything. Light filled the chamber as the ancient machines began shutting down. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out as coalition forces destroyed Maker facilities that had hidden in the darkness for millions of years. The Maker AI fought desperately to preserve itself, but Frank's programming was working. One by one, the artificial minds that had controlled galactic civilization for so long went silent forever. It's done, Frank said quietly. The last Maker facility just went offline. Above them, the space battle had ended not with destruction, but with celebration. Former enemies worked together to rescue survivors and begin the process of rebuilding. The Vrexian Empire was over, but something better was taking its place. Months later, representatives from hundreds of species met on a neutral world to discuss the future. For the first time in galactic history, no single species dominated the others. The artificial fear that had controlled civilization was gone, replaced by cooperation between equals. Captain Julie Anderson stood with Commander Zakar and leaders from dozens of other species, watching as they signed agreements for a new kind of galactic government, one based on choice rather than fear, on cooperation rather than domination. What happens now? Zakar asked. Julie looked at the diverse beings around them, all working together despite their differences. Now we find out what civilization looks like when it's not built on artificial fear. We discover what the galaxy can become when everyone has a choice. The age of the Vrexian Empire was over. The age of galactic freedom had begun, and humanity, the species that had refused to be afraid, had helped lead the way to a better future for everyone.